Hey, Carly,
Hi.
it's Top Chef season 22. It's here. We've watched the first episode. You've already been doing amazing work on our Substack and giving way more insights than I could have ever imagined on past seasons. We even got Tournament of Champions and Wildcard Kitchen analysis. You'll be doing that for our Substack this year, which you can get at packyourknives.com. Go check it out if you haven't already. Carly, you've been doing amazing work. So I just want right off the bat, thank you so much for contributing to Pack Your Knives and lending us your genius analysis onto the site.
Thanks. I mean, it's been a lot of fun, and I really like being in community with other people who nerd out in the same way I do.
Yeah, we're nerding out, and we're going to do that again today because we're going to go through what we saw in the first episode, the premiere, and I just wanted to get some of your thoughts about Canada, your thoughts about this season, if there are any changes. But first, I have this dying question that I had to ask you is, I'm someone who watches an NBA game with a notepad and an Excel spreadsheet out, and people in Miami, when I was covering the NBA, all the writers would have Word documents open, and I was the only one nerding out with a spreadsheet. And I felt like this is one of the first times that I'm going to be interacting or covering an event with someone who has probably multiple spreadsheets out in front of them while they're consuming the content. So I wanted to ask Carly, as someone who's just an incredible data cruncher like yourself and very fluent in a lot of visualizations and different languages, I'm sure, computer languages, how do you watch Top Chef? Is it purely a manual thing where you just have a pen and paper and then you go back, or do you have multiple windows open? What is there a cat on your shoulder, Carly? What give me the setup for Carly Levitz watching Top Chef.
Yeah, so it kind of depends. Partly because my partner also loves Top Chef, and the most optimal way to watch and do data collection is for me to be in control of the remote so that I can pause it and go back and pause it. But we're watching this because we love the show perspective, that isn't as fun. So last night I was like, you know what? This is the premiere. We are going to really enjoy the show. So last night was actually just pen and paper, writing down thoughts, questions that I had, keeping track a little bit of things that stood out that I would later put into a spreadsheet. Because what happens is, because I have multiple spreadsheets attached for each episode, challenge description, challenge results, what is the dish, what is the placement of the person who was eliminated? Can we enter that data? Because, there's Last Chance Kitchen. I tend to get really into it, and then I don't absorb any content. And so there's a balance there because of how much I love the show. I need to sort of figure that out. So I did rewatch it, the first half this morning, and do some data collection. But yeah, I mean, it's right now I'm at a standing desk, and it's there was a cat on my right earlier, and then I have a 2-page spread of a notebook, and then I have all my spreadsheets open, and then between my coffee and the remotes, there was a lot happening.
Yeah. Because data entry is an important part of the job. Is when you're watching, you want to make sure that you track and chart what's happening on the screen. And what we've done at Pack Your Knives in the past, and what you're doing for us now, is you're creating what we call in sports a box score, is a stat, basically a summary of the game in a chart form. And so in basketball, we would have, points and rebounds and assists and how did they shoot from the floor. And in Top Chef, it's a lot of description. It's what was this dish? What category was the protein, or what order did they go in the elimination challenge draft? And we had a lot of those elements in this episode. And so I found myself also the learning curve in the first episode is so steep because you're trying to familiarize with all the different chefs, and you're like, is that oh, what's his name? Or is she Bailey or is she Anya? And you're trying to like figure out the names and putting faces to names. And so I don't know about you, Carly, but it was particularly slow this episode in every premiere because I'm kind of learning the chefs.
Yeah, that is very similar for me as well. And I think also part of one of the reasons why I was like, I'm going to just enjoy and absorb what I can from just a first view.
So a rundown of some of the things that, Carly, you've already written about at packyourknives.com on our Substack, which you can subscribe monthly or annually. You can be a free subscriber as well and just get the notices and get some free stuff. But I really encourage the listeners out there, if you want the most in-depth analysis on this show, become a paid subscriber. Also subscribe to our Instagram. We're on Twitter at Pack Knives and on Instagram at Pack Your Knives. And one of the things that you've done is beginner's luck, the study of who wins the first elimination challenge. How powerful is that in predicting the eventual Top Chef winner and how far they go in the competition? One of my favorite topics covering Top Chef is, early in the history of Top Chef, there seemed to be like a first winner effect. Is that the first winner seemed to do better in the competition than expected. And yeah, there's a lot of information that you can glean from winning the first episode with all that nerves and the stress and the competition, rising above a field of 14 or 15 different other competitors. That tells you something about a chef. But you went into the data. You also did an analysis on the most successful winner, because as we know, there are a lot of ways to do the stats on who is the best winner of all time. Is it the one who's won the most percentage, the highest percentage of challenges? Is it quick fires? Is it combination of quick fires and elimination challenges? You broke it all down.
The elimination challenge that is only individual versus team elimination challenges? Mm-hmm.
That's a really important distinction that I hadn't done before, Carly, is the wins that I see on the Wikipedia page, which has always been a great resource for me, is the little like grid that they have on Wikipedia Top Chef, where I can see winners, top three, bottom three. But what I don't get is like they don't shade differently depending on whether it's a team challenge versus an individual challenge. So it might look like a chef is just winning everything, but it might be that like 6 out of the 9 wins or 3 out of the 5 wins were on team challenges that maybe other people had carried them to that victory. So it's an important distinction. So thank you for doing that.
Yeah, for sure. I think, it's hard to, because I can provide stats on these things and there are opinions, right? Like, so for me, Richard Blais is just going to be one of those people who I think did a phenomenal job in season 8 All-Stars. And, he's not necessarily in the top 4, top 5 of a lot of these stats, but just emotionally, one of my favorites.
Yeah. And that has to count for something, like in the greatest player of all time in whatever sport it is, or the greatest TV show of all time. It doesn't necessarily have to be this cold-hearted analysis of the stats. It could just be like, that character really just, I vibed with that character on that show, and that's my favorite show of all time. Or that baseball player, because of his batting stance, I loved watching that player play. And he might have been a terrible hitter, but that's my goat,
Yeah.
And Richard Blais, same thing, where I'm looking at the stats that you provided, and I'm like, wow, like the bar is so high when it comes to who is the great. I mean, Melissa King in the All-Star season. Unreal, but also how do you grade against the curve of like they were competing against all-star chefs?
Right. Yeah.
It's hard.
It really is.
The Wildcard Kitchen, which is hosted by Eric Ajapong on Food Network TV. That is an awesome show. You've broken down some recaps and doing some analysis there, as well as the Tournament of Champions. You did some work on looking at whether Top Chef contestants, how they do, the alums, how they do on Tournament of Champions, which if you haven't checked it out, go do that right now. It's March Madness, not just in basketball.
Exactly.
You're enjoying that.
Very much so. I mean, I love Tournament of Champions. You get a lot of great personalities, and they've really expanded the field over the number of seasons. This is season 6. And there's a lot of favorites on there. And so it's hard to choose. And so then it's like you get to root for everyone. And then in battles where you like both the people, you know, you're just really invested. I really enjoy Tournament of Champions. Plus, there's a lot of data, right? Because it's very similar to the basketball tournament, right? In that there are scores, there's a winner, there's a loser, there's a seed. So I've liked doing that analysis. Something that I have coming up is looking at, because something I've wondered is, so they get a randomizer, so they get random, out of a series of options, but protein, produce, equipment, style. And I was curious if there's a difference in overall score based on what the protein is that they used. I mean, produce, I'll need to do a more figure out a shorter number of categories. So I'm going to be doing that coming up. And we do see some differences. So
do you have a hypothesis yet?
I already did the analysis and I'm just trying to figure out how to visualize it or do something fun. So I can't say, but I did think there might be a difference. Yeah.
Awesome. And then the thing that I was immediately smitten was the GOAT leaderboard that you provided a couple months ago, which this is kind of, it lets almost the user kind of choose what they value. Is you providing the stats, and it's almost like a pick your own adventure of like, here's what you need to know about the Top Chef competitors, their stats, and you can kind of draw your own conclusions of what you value and what you place. Because for me, I'm still stuck on like, how do we adjust for competition? And it's so hard to do. Like, how would you ever be able to adjudicate an all-star season versus a regular season? But we hadn't gotten all the stats until now. So thank you for providing that and stirring up the pot even more with the stats that you provided. Yeah.
I mean, that's what I'm here for. Start the conversation.
So we've got an amazing first episode. I think there's Top Chef Destination Canada. They've called it Destination Canada rather than Canada to differentiate from the franchise Top Chef Canada. How did you like it? I haven't asked you this, and I wanted to hear your thoughts, just overall, big picture. What are your thoughts on the premiere?
I loved it. I had forgotten that they no longer give immunity in the quick fires, that it's immunity in elimination for the next elimination. So I was like, oh yeah, I forgot. I was stunned by the accolades of these chefs. Holy cow.
Yeah.
I am also working on a trend over time of the James Beard semifinalists and winners for each season and whether it was before they were on Top Chef or after. So that one's taken me a little bit more time. I have to really clean the data. But this is clearly, by far and away, I think the most awarded. I'm going to just say that without really looking at the data, but like that was really impressive. And then another thing which I've looked at in the past, and I will in the future too for this season, is it seems like there are a lot of chefs that are not, like they have lived elsewhere than the United States. And I think that it really shows the broadened perspective of what American food is. And that has been really exciting to see over the past number of seasons. So I'm excited to see what things are that I don't know that I get to learn about.
Yeah, we've got Ecuadorian cuisine, we've got Russian cuisine, we've got Chinese, we've got Italian, Korean, we've got
Trinidadian,
Indian. We've got an incredible mix of different cuisines and ethnicities, and they're traveling all over the world. And so even if you wanted to put Massimo, for example, in a box of like, he's an Italian chef, well, he's in Montreal, or he's a Canadian chef as well. And so there's just a great mixture of talent. And I think this season, given that we're kind of traveling around Canada and we got a good look at the different, it was a nice little opening dish, the elimination challenge, where we're going through different sections or areas, regions of Canada to learn more about their cuisine. That was a good setup for the season, so I can get my bearings about how massive Canada is and all the different regions. And it was good to see the alums there.
Oh my God. Right? I kind of giggled and clapped my hands because I adore Nicole and I really enjoyed Dale.
Yes.
Amazing. I was really, really, really happy to see them.
And we also have Top Chef Canada judge David Zilber, who's been on the show before, and I love his analysis. I think he's fantastic. I mean, we got an elevated hotel food elevated hospital food reference later in the episode, and I'm like, that is exactly what it looked like to me. And he just put it in such a succinct, cutting way that was like, that's gotta hurt if you're hearing that your food is elevated hospital food. But he has great energy. I love his analysis, and having him part of the episode too is also really strong. And one thing, Carly, that I think, we have this issue with some of the chefs from the get-go is the time management. And I'm wondering if the producers themselves or the editors, Magical Elves, also had a time management issues, because at the end of the episode, we had, I think this was like the only change from last year, besides the prize money and Delta and that incorporation. But like, usually they don't, when they bring out the bottom chefs, they usually like say, here's what we weren't so excited about for your dish. And then we're going to discuss. Like,
poof. It was like, she was gone.
She was gone. Right?
Yeah. I was like, okay. You caught that
that's
too.
That's different. Yeah.
Hopefully that doesn't stay, but I mean, it's also hard because in the first episode, they have to set the stage for literally everyone. So, I think that is a really tough challenge, and because they want to show everyone. And I mean,
there's only so many minutes in the show. Like that's literally why I was like, maybe it's a time thing. It's just like they just ran out of time to like, and I did remember after watching it again, they did they played up Mimi's issues with her dish a lot when they were eating it and at the dining table. So you kind of knew all the flaws of her dishes. It's not that they had to rehash that at the judges' table. I wanted to see the weighing of the issues, like the risotto versus the elevated hospital food.
The deliberation. The comparison.
Like sizing them up next to each other, Carly?
Yes. Maybe that's what made it feel so abrupt, is we are used to a flow of the bottom chefs come to chef's table, judging table. They talk a little bit, then the judges talk, and then they come back. And so I think, the flow felt different. But maybe it was just that bad that there wasn't that much deliberation.
Yeah. Yeah. And we didn't get like kind of in the stew room where one chef is like, oh, I definitely am going home. And then the other chef's like, no, you're not, you're good. I'm definitely going home. We didn't kind of get that back and forth as much as we might have in the past. But again, that's probably just like a first episode thing. But I remember last year we had David Murphy, who was like eliminated. And then we were like kind of left hanging, like, is he going to Last Chance Kitchen? And then there might be switches this season that we're not totally aware of, or changes. So we'll have to see in the second episode. But on that note, I think it's pretty much the same as last year in terms of the format, right? You mentioned the immunity for quickfire is out. It's now prize money and then immunity for the elimination challenge winner in the second episode. So that I should have said this at the top. Spoiler alert. Dimple Vinny, he won the episode. And so he gets immunity for the next episode. But this guy went number 2 in our draft of Top Chef draft at the Pack Your Knives Top Chef draft. I was kind of, I'm not surprised that Eric went with Vinny. I just felt like he kind of seemed like a jerk. Right. And so I was wondering if that was going to be advantageous for him going forward. And Eric didn't seem to have any issue. If you haven't listened to Eric Adjapong and I do the draft, go check that out wherever you listen to podcasts. It's there. It's also on YouTube at Count the Dings, our YouTube channel, Count the Dings. You can watch that there. It's also on the Substack. I mean, you can get that immediately after the show airs on Substack if you subscribe. That little incident, quote unquote, with Lana, where he was like, I'm going to do this apple bowl and I'm going to do a smoking gun and try to like smoke the dish. And she was not having either of those things.
Yeah.
And yet it was an awesome dish and he won the elimination challenge. So I don't know. I was kind of, I didn't know if I was going to draft him number 1 or he wasn't on number 1 on my overall big board. But for you, Carly, coming out of the episode, was Vinny the clear winner and someone you would have drafted number 1 overall in a fantasy?
No. The reason being is that team challenges are, I don't know, a third-ish maybe of challenges, and you need to be able to work with people. If he were to get on a team with Corwin, who he worked with in the past, like maybe that would go super smoothly. So I think there's some element of that. I was also worried prior to the quickfire judging that, because I remember seasons 1 and 2, all those sorts of like style over substance things where people were serving things out of pineapples, right? Like, what's the point of that? And so I was worried that was going to be a problem. But then Tom really liked it and said, getting that extra apple and that tartness really helped. And so I was like, okay, maybe. But then as we moved towards elimination, I was like, we're hearing from him a lot and he's using liquid nitrogen. And so of course my mind goes to Richard Blais again. And I'm like, okay, is he doing this judiciously and like really being thoughtful about it? Or is he really just focusing on, I want to do this technique? And it clearly worked. So there's something that hasn't yet resonated with me about him. I haven't yet connected with him as a viewer, but clearly he's doing something right. And my radar of, what's in style is clearly out of date. Yeah. I mean, I would really be curious to hear from Eric and his perspective of, are there older trends like serving things in an apple or a pineapple or a pumpkin? Like, is that coming back? Or are there other things that, we're seeing trending? But then to the point about that team challenge and like, you need to feel comfortable putting your name to this dish. Like, how much do you push back, right? Like Lana did try to push back and it seemed like Paola also was not super into it. And so it's 2v1, but the one person got their way. And so like, what is in a competition, when and how much do you push back is something that I would love to get Eric's perspective on.
Yeah. And quickfire versus elimination challenge. That's
true. Mm-hmm. That's true. Yeah.
Like, how much at judges table are you gonna be like, hey, hold up. He was pushing for the apple bowl. I wasn't a big fan of it. It seemed gimmicky to me. And you're really like sticking yourself out there because it's elimination challenge. You're at judges table and you need to like be bold about, your perspective on this, because if he's going to drive that train, you might get railroaded. You might be like not getting your viewpoint out there, or not showing that you had some conviction about your dish. And in a quickfire, the stakes aren't as big. So I get why Lana was just like, kind of let it slide, and it worked. And so that's the other thing. Maybe they didn't push back as much about Vincenzo's Apple idea because they could tell that he knew what he was doing. Maybe it was a sense of like, I trust this guy at least a little bit. He seems to know that what he's talking about, and he's competent. Whereas if there was a chef that was suggesting that I didn't really think had much credibility, I would push back a lot harder. So maybe they were picking up on Vinny's competence, and like he was impressive enough, but he might not have been going about it the right way.
Yeah. Yeah. And that kind of makes me think about how the chefs are perceiving each other. I was kind of surprised that like once everyone was in the cars together, I don't know how long that car ride was, but like, why weren't they talking about each other's styles? And like, why, like, I would have loved to hear that so they could all get to know each other, because clearly it was going to be a team challenge. But then sort of how those perceptions, where are those perceptions landing? And like, how did that play out with the way in which the schoolyard pick for the elimination challenge regions happened? First impression is everything. And I mean, some of them knew each other, right? Like Corwin and Vincenzo, obviously. But do
you think they liked each other? I don't get the feeling that they liked each other. It seemed a little icy to me. Seemed like, it's great to see you again. Like it's great to see that you found your way. There was some comment where I was like, that seemed like a backhanded compliment.
Yeah. I mean, I also wonder too, if they want to downplay that. I remember, Kelsey and Sarah in Portland, Kentucky. They were like, let's not let people know that we know each other. So there might be some of that, but
gamesmanship there. Yeah.
But they both, name drop Nomad. So it's like, oh, well, there's going to be that connection.
Yeah. Yeah, of course. And I do think that there is, it was an interesting episode because we had a lot of game theory here with the draft. I could see kind of your team is now your opponent, thing that was developing in the episode, where your quickfire team is now going to be, I think they did that last year or maybe in the year before that, where they kind of flip it on them. And I wonder if that played into a little bit of, I don't think they would, because they don't have that much information. Maybe later in the season, they'll think twice about who they team up with, because you're probably going to face them for the elimination challenge. But there were the different regions. We got Katiana, Cesar, and Mimi won the yellow team, the quickfire. So they got the first pick, and they were the central region. They decided to go with the central region. And then the draft went like, oh, you get to choose who goes next. And it's hard for me to break down the strategy in this because I don't really have a good feel for the chefs yet. And I'm wondering if you had a sense that there was any sort of gamesmanship about who you picked to go next, or was it just a proximity thing? Like, I'm going to, purple team, you want to go next? Was it like completely random? Or do you think there was actual gamesmanship of picking kind of the weakest team next because you want the toughest team to have the least advantageous ingredient at the end?
Yeah, I think there's a mix. So the yellow team chose purple. Purple, I didn't write down who was on that, but they were
purple was
not
Corwin,
listed.
Kat, and Henry.
Okay.
Yeah.
So they were not listed as one of the top. And then they chose red, who was one of the top.
Lana, Paula, and Vincenzo. Yep.
Mm-hmm. Then red chose blue, who was the other team not mentioned as one of the top. So my brain, and we didn't see any of the deliberations among the team, my brain says Lana has been on a cooking competition before. cooking competition show before. She was on Pressure Cooker. She's got that strategy mind in addition to cooking skills. And so I am interpreting that as a overt strategy, but I have no reason to really think that. I will say the green team let's see, that one was, do you have that?
Shawai, Massimo, and Tristan.
Yes. I was really impressed with that team, and they were the last ones to pick. You know, I just thought they did such a good job. Yeah. Something I was really glad, though, I was worried when Anya mentioned how cliquey the Chicago people were, and then she expressed that she really wanted the North region. I was worried that they were going to overrule her in some way and sort of continue that potential headbutting. But I was really happy that Anya got the North region and then also was in the top.
Delivered, for sure. For sure. And you mentioned that, as well as I didn't want to gloss over that she felt like she got dominated at the judges table. Right? Well, I guess it was for the quickfire, is that Bailey wasn't giving her the shout out for the cabbage. And she like did a little sidebar afterwards, like, yo, can you give me some, mention the my cabbage. It's the cabbage dish. That you kind of felt, and also that she's the oldest one, I believe, on the competition. So she probably kind of felt like, these kids these days, they have no respect for the elders. Right. Come on. And it felt like she overcame all that. And I had her very high on my big board because I was like, for her to overcome that, and she seems like she has this chip on her shoulder that I really enjoyed in this episode.
Same. Plus, soup with dill just sounds so good.
Okay, so this is the trend. You asked me, like, is there a food trend, an up and coming food trend that you think might be a big part of this season? I think it might be a cheat code to do these like consomme or like little soup, protein in the middle, and then kind of pour a little soup in there, or just like a shallow pool of some sort of delicious broth. I feel like that might be a cheat code on Top Chef. I want to research this. I feel like Buddha was really good at this, and then obviously Vinny in this episode had a beautiful dish where it was just I don't know, it was perfectly cooked, and I love a good sauce to dip something in, and so a protein that is kind of in the middle of that. It feels like that's a really good recipe for success on Top Chef.
Yeah. I think it also, like, when I think of elevated food, I think like that is one of the visuals that I see in my mind's eye, is that style. So
don't you get excited when like the server comes by and is just like pouring a little soup pitcher in your plate, so and it just feels, you feel like a royalty at that point.
Yeah. I know you know this about me, but I think chives are the cutest food. And the fact that Gail, going back to the quickfire, but that Gail chose chives, and then people were making like chive oil, and that looked really like, just the green is gorgeous, but I just think chives are so cute.
Yeah. It's it's so cute. And also, of course, Gail is going to have such a little adorable thing for her ingredient of choice. Tomatoes was that was interesting, is to have tomatoes as like the secret ingredient from Kristen.
I agree. People did well with that, but yeah. So I was just, because I was thinking like with the oils and the little gremolata or sofritos things on top, like when I think of fancy food and elevated food, and maybe the food that's doing well on Top Chef, like that is what comes to mind.
Now with Mimi though, I'm wondering, did you feel like Corwin, because I feel like Corwin was the first one on the show, right? Like yes,
he had the first confessional. Yeah.
First confessional, right? And then I think Mimi was close afterward.
Yep,
and
right
I'm
after.
wondering, do you think that that's on purpose? Is like, we don't want Mimi or the eliminated chef to be the first one to show because maybe that's a tell. But also we need to get as much Mimi in this episode as we can because she's about to go dark on the show. So I'm like, part of me was, in retrospect, and this might be confirmation bias, is rewatching the show and being like, oh, the pots and pans. She was playing up the whole pots and pans and the breakup thing. And yeah, come to think of it, there was a lot of Mimi screen time in the first half of the show. And in your work doing other breakdowns for other shows and Survivor or what have you, Carly, is there an effect that you see on screen time with eliminated contestants, or do you think that is a myth?
I think it's real, because, well, I think it just, for Survivor, the tribes that lose, we see more of because we need to see their considerations and deliberations for what their decisions are going to be, right? And it makes sense from a viewer's perspective because you don't want it to be jarring. I do think that, first eliminated is tough because not only do they need to sort of show why this person is being eliminated, they also need to tell us who they are, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that I think is really tough. Yeah, I think it is related. I will say that Danny had the first confessional of the first episode last season.
Ooh.
And I only have data for seasons 1, 2, 3, 16, 17, and 21. And so there is actually like a range of that. But, Eric was first on his season or in season 16, and he got third. So there is something, but then also there have been people who got like 11th who had the very first confessional.
And this is one thing, I think you're already on this path, but I wonder how self-aware the editors are as the seasons progress and as the internet takes over. Like, will certain trends that happen in like the first 10 seasons, will they start to be phased out as there's more scrutiny on the episodes and there's more film and there's more breakdowns and there's more people watching or people rewatching? Is that it becomes a little bit more fair in this sense, or evens out in more recent seasons because they're more aware of these things? I'm wondering if we're going to see that like the first eliminated chef getting more screen time in the first episode. Will that be more true in the early episodes versus once they start being like, ooh, they're catching up to us, or hey, we gotta not be biased here or show any sort of integrity issues on that. Let's try to make this as random as possible in the last 5 seasons.
Yeah, I mean, I think that there is definitely a change. Like, I know that for Survivor, the edit has gotten a lot more even. The edit being the amount of confessionals and screen time that people have. And the data that I have right now for Top Chef are too preliminary to say, but I would think so. And I say this as a mostly quantitative person, we really can't forget the storytelling aspect, right? Like, I can provide information, right? And as a viewer, maybe I don't care. Like, maybe there are issues of fairness and bias. Let's address that. But I want a story. Sometimes I call my TV shows my stories, right? And so the art that the editors need to bring to this while keeping biases in mind, it's a tall order. And even though, maybe later this season I'll be saying other things about confessional counts and that sort of thing, credit where credit's due. That is a hard job to add art to that.
Yeah. And the simple fact that some contestants are better in confessionals than others, and some just have money quotes, and amazing lines that you're just like, we got, like, Massimo seems like someone that I know it's easy and cliche to just like point to Fabio from that season, where it's just like every time Massimo's on the camera, I just feel like he's going to say something funny or be braggadocious or something crazy.
Cutting board.
How do you do that?
How? It was just like a chunk, and I was like, what? And then when he went up to introduce his food, and then he just boomed out whatever he was saying, and Kristen was like, "Oh, good morning." That was, I was like, okay, character, like, but the cutting board. Also, that cod was freaking huge. Yeah. He
needed that force. He needed that. He needed a sledgehammer to get through that. And I do think that was a first on Top Chef, right? Like, I've never seen that happen.
It has to be.
Wow.
Yeah. Like, we've seen plates broken, and someone else broke a plate in the episode, but like a cutting board, that's. So
I remember talking to Eric, and he was like, right before we went on air, I was like, I think the quality of chefs is really strong this season. He's like, I was thinking the actual opposite is like, there was a few chefs that really struggled, especially with time management. And when he mentioned, I was like, oh yeah, we should be harping on the fact that, like, Tristan didn't get his sauce on the plate, and Kat didn't get all of her ingredients on the plate, and they didn't even get eliminated. And in past seasons, that might have been just a death sentence for them, is that the idea of like Tristan going to the table and having a duo of seafood, and then not having that connective tissue of the curry sauce. Granted, Tom did say, hey, I don't even know if it would have been a better thing. It might have overpowered the flavors.
Yeah.
But did you get the sense that it was a season that had, I wouldn't say lows, but there were some time management issues for sure in this episode?
Yeah, and having 3 of the 15 chefs have time management issues seems like just a high proportion. So I would agree. I wonder, sort of going back to the top, of these chefs have incredible accolades, and it's maybe at the point in their career where this, I don't think it could hurt them, but maybe it could, right, if they do poorly. And so the level of stress is actually higher now because they have so much to prove, or I guess more to lose, as compared to a sous chef who, works at a great restaurant, but isn't, had worked with all of these famous people in the past. Now there are like lineages of Top Chef people whose proteges have gone on the show. Like Nicholas Elmy, I think, worked with Michael Voltaggio. Someone this episode mentioned Sarah Grunberg. So it's like, I think there might be something to that.
The pedigree, I think, is a real like the tree of who you've worked with. Another thing that we've tracked in sports is, do coaching trees matter? That, I was mentored by this coach, and therefore I'm going to get more jobs because I was under Greg Popovich, the winningest NBA coach of all time. And it does carry a lot of weight when, the first chef that I was a sous under was Michael Voltaggio. Of course, I'm gonna feel like, ooh, like that's a real competitor. And in this episode, we had we have only one home state chef, or one home country chef, I should say, with Massimo. Can you give the listeners just a little a snippet of your research and what that shows, or what you're thinking about as you're watching Massimo this season, and the relationship between home state or home country chefs, home region chefs, and the hosting city state chef or region of Top Chef? So I'm thinking Sarah Bradley and Kentucky off the top of my head, but there are others in the past where it seems like Dan Jacobs in Milwaukee and Wisconsin last season. Is there any sort of that you can see any statistical significance with home state chefs and how they do on Top Chef?
So a month or two ago, I posted about this sort of home state advantage on Pack Your Knives, the Substack, and we don't really see a difference. I do wonder if for challenges, sort of like this elimination challenge, for example, that are drawing on ingredients that they're familiar with, or they are being judged by people who they have worked with or know of. I think there's maybe something more there that we could really dig into, for challenges that are specific to the area. Like if there was a Minnesota version of Top Chef, like doing hot plate, like maybe people would not really know what to do, but the Minnesotan chef would be like, oh, I got this. Right. And so we don't at the sort of surface level, home state versus not, there isn't a relationship. But I just have this niggling that there might be more there, and I haven't yet looked into it.
Yeah. And I do think that I've noticed in recent seasons with Buddha, I remember he would work under a chef, and then that chef would be on the judges table. And it was like, ooh, I can't tell if that's going to be an advantage or a disadvantage. Is like almost, does that judge become even more critical because they don't want to show a bias, or are they going to just subconsciously give that chef that used to work for them a little bit of an edge, just subconsciously, and look for the positives and focus on the positives rather than maybe they didn't cook that fish all that well. I'm wondering if that's a thing that we'll see with Massimo this season, but he moves on. We had, in the top 5, Cesar, Vinny, Shuai, Henry, and Anya. I'm wondering, Carly, do you have an underdog, or do you have a sleeper pick as we go forward that you're like, Tom, I know they might not have the best outing in the first episode, but I have really good vibes from this particular chef?
Yeah, I would say, so I'm also sort of comparing it to your and Eric's drafts, but Corwin was a lower draft pick for y'all. And what I wrote down in my notes during the quickfire was how he really seemed to come out as a leader of that group, but also super collaborative. And so there was something there that I was like, that's really cool. So I think him, this will super jive with you, Katiana. I was really excited about her, and then her brother Reed Scott appearing on the screen. I did make my partner pause it because I was like, it's Dan from Veep, and he's like, what? And then we Googled it, and then we continued watching. But even before that, I was really excited, and I love the idea of Korean Americana. I would just really love to learn more about her food, and I've watched a number of Korean cooking competition shows, and so I think I'm a little bit biased.
Talk to me about Korean cooking competition shows. I'm not well versed in that genre.
Yeah. So there was one where Edward Lee of Top Chef, he competed, and it was like Black Spoon versus White Spoon, where the really heavily accoladed chefs go against the more mom and pop shop type chefs. And then they narrowed the field from 100 to like 20 in one episode. It was bonkers. But
this feels too much like Squid Game. Maybe I'm making too much of a parallel. They eliminated 80 people in the first episode, or just to whittle it down. That does feel Squid Gamey.
Yeah. But I just like, they had a challenge kind of similar to Top Chef, where they're like, feature this ingredient, and it was tofu, and just the different ways that they used an ingredient that I buy each week was really cool. And so plus I love gochujang, and So Katiana, I wouldn't say she's a sleeper, but I'm excited.
Yeah. Here's the draft order. It was Katiana, Vinny, Cesar, Shuai, Henry, Lana, Anya, Tristan, Zubair, Massimo, Corwin, Bailey, Paula, Kat, and then finally Mimi, who was eliminated and goes to Last Chance Kitchen. I didn't, Cesar's kind of an unknown. He doesn't have much of a social presence, Carly. And then he came out with the Papa Yo, which was like, whoa, that is really technically advanced. And Eric was super impressed by him and picked him very early. And I couldn't get a read. Like, he was very even keeled, didn't show much emotion at judges table, to the point where they're like, dude, you're not even like reacting to being in the top 5. And so I think even though he was picked in the top 3 of our draft, I kind of feel like he might be just underrated, if that's even possible.
That's a great point. So last season, when I thought about who I was really rooting for after the first episode, it was Savannah, who ended up going really far, but not winning. And I wonder if he's sort of giving that vibe of like, holy crap, that is very technical and adorable, and adorable, creative.
Right? Yeah.
So like maybe he does go far, but maybe he doesn't win. But I also really liked him.
Mm-hmm. It's a good cast.
Yeah, it is.
It's really strong. Like you mentioned it, the accolades are really strong. And I think there's a lot of good personalities, and we've already seeing like, I wouldn't say Vincenzo is the villain, but there are some kind of villain aspects to him that we got with Chef Brandon. I think it was Brandon Rosen from back in Kentucky, where he's just like a strong. He's not a bully, but he's very forthright in his opinions. Yeah. But he's also charming with the dimples. So it's like hard to, and he's got a good story with his brothers, and he's got this like, very impressive resume, and he's very sure of himself, which I think won't play nice in some team competitions, right. But in other team competitions, that might be necessary, is to have a clear leader of the pack that can like delineate and delegate all the different roles, and that might be useful.
Oh my God, is he going home in Restaurant Wars, Tom? Is he the executive chef?
He is. It's 100%. He's not a front of house person. I don't think he's front of house.
Mm-mm.
Who's the most front of house in this episode? Who's the one who's like screaming, oh yeah, they're going to be great at front of house? I'm trying to think.
Tristan
would be a great front of house. Oh yeah. Let's see. Kat would be, she's the actress. She's the dancer. I feel like she's
the chef to the Smashing Pumpkin guy.
Yeah, Billy Corgan. Yeah, Billy Corgan, personal chef. I feel like she's been around enough celebrities that she would be, comfortable impressing the celebrity chefs that walk through the door. I feel like she'd be very good in front of house. Massimo got this like charming aspect to him, be very good in front of house. I feel like he's going to have a tough time deciding between executive chef and front of house. If we get a front of house, didn't we not get front of house last year? Or I don't know if it was last year.
That is possible. I don't remember.
Yeah. I like that. We should have thought of that as like doing who's the most likely, like doing the superlatives off the rip is like one thing I wanted to note. I think it appears that we have like a communal kitchen and a communal like hotel room or a house situation, which in the last couple of years, we haven't really had that much.
No, because I think they had their own hotel rooms. They didn't show what bedroom situation it was. So like maybe there's a shared suite and then separate bedrooms. But I love joint meals, and I hope we get some of that, like just hanging out at the house, quote unquote. Yeah, that could be cool. See them making breakfast for themselves.
Yeah. we're going to get like the yoga, we're going to get the weightlifters, we're going to get the ones that are like, you know, extra preening in front of the mirror. We're going to get those shots for sure this season. That's always a staple of Top Chef. But I do think we could use a little bit more of, you know, off air moments where they're just kind of hanging out and you get some more story and more depth on their character and the interactions. And remember the Bears, with what season was that? That was Joe Flam. That was my man.
Brendan.
Yep. Yep. And what's his?
They were adorable.
Yeah, like having those little, you know, little clicks. It is kind of fun. I do enjoy that. But any last thoughts on this episode? Anything that you're already you want to tell the audience? Like, I'm going to be tracking this. Like, this is something that caught my eye in the first episode, and I want to see if this trend continues, or I'm going to be tracking this sort of thing that may be different in this episode than in years past. Is there anything in particular that you felt like was unique about this episode?
Not unique. What comes to mind, of course, is the risotto of it all, and the fact that we need data on the number of times people made risotto. Because right now, what Wikipedia has is just the number of times people won with risotto versus not. Like, they don't have that collated, but like I could grab that. But I need to know, what about all the people in the middle, right? Like, it's sort of like how there used to be the trend that if you won the first elimination challenge, you were going to be doing very well. And then that hasn't happened since Brooke season, Charleston season 14, right? So like, I would love to either confirm or disprove the risotto myth.
Oh, I love it. I love it. and then, you know what? Maybe we'll find that there's a true risotto that we haven't even figured out yet, that there is a real ingredient. I think we probably would have figured it out by now, but maybe there's a ingredient or a protein that is even more of a death knell than risotto. Yeah. So I can't, let's see, pork. This was the pork and mashed potatoes in this episode. I'm bummed for Mimi. I love Portland, Maine. That was tough to go out in the first one, but at least you got the 5,000.
Yes, and Last Chance Kitchen. I think it's very interesting from a design format standpoint for Top Chef, both last season and this season, to essentially be relying on the viewers to also watch Last Chance Kitchen, because if either Samuel or Ying get in, we aren't going to know them unless we've watched Last Chance Kitchen. So it's just it kind of reminds me of other Bravo shows where there's the after show, there's Watch What Happens Live, there's the reunions. There's just a lot of pieces to a Bravo show beyond the actual show. And it seems like they're going more that route of relying on us as viewers to be watching more.
Yeah, and the Dish with Kish is awesome. It's great.
Oh, and the Dish with Kish.
It's great. And I think Top Chef has done a superb job of having like the secondary content pieces.
Yes.
It was awesome last season. So if you haven't watched, go back and watch it, because it is evergreen. Like, it isn't so attached to a particular episode. I think those are really, really strong. I think what I'd like to track this season is the Chicago chefs and the New York chefs. There might be some sort of alliance that brews throughout the season that I would be curious if that continues, because it does seem like we have a disproportionate number of chefs from those regions or those cities that it might kind of sort itself out throughout the season. So I'm going to keep an eye on that. And I'm very happy with my team that I drafted. I'm very happy with my team. Katiana, I think is a even though she didn't show out in this episode in terms of a lot of points, I feel pretty good about having her on my team. So I'm psyched about this season. I'm psyched about having you on the show, and thank you so much for doing this episode.
So much fun.
we're just beginning. This is the fun part, is that like, oh man, we've got so much good stuff coming forward, and with Top Chef this season and with our coverage of Pack Your Knives. I'm pumped. I'm very excited. Carly, thank you so much for riffing about the premiere. And I do want to really encourage people to go check out Carly's work, and go check her out. You were on the Moms of Flavortown podcast, yes, and that was great. They did a great job. Big fan of that show and what they're doing. You did a great job on that program as well.
Yeah, super happy to be here. I love talking about this stuff, and if you viewers, listeners have any things that you're really curious to learn about, you can comment on any of the Pack Your Knives posts, or find me on Instagram, carly.sue.bear, or through the Pack Your Knives Instagram. And always love to hear what other people are interested in.
Yes, send all your ideas to Carly, and you know that she's going to definitely consider them, and probably spend, like all of us in the data analysis world, thinking way too much time about how to attack that question. Yes.
Yes.
Carly, thanks so much, and have a great weekend.
You too.